The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood, dust, and stale coffee, the kind of place where stories were reduced to case numbers and lives were compressed into a few cold sentences. On the hard wooden bench near the back sat a black man in a worn grey jacket that had once been military issue, though time and weather had erased most signs of its origin. His boots were scuffed down to the leather, his hands rough and cracked, folded quietly in his lap. His name was Elias Turner, though almost no one in the room bothered to remember it. To most people present that morning, Elias was just another homeless defendant. Another nuisance case to be processed before lunch. Another man who had fallen through the cracks and stayed there. Two young lawyers whispered to each other at the prosecution table, glancing back at him with thinly veiled amusement. One of them smirked and muttered something about public intoxication and wasting the court's time. A clerk rolled her eyes as she sorted papers. Even the bailiff shifted his weight impatiently, already assuming how this would end. Elias kept his gaze forward, calm, steady. He had learned long ago that reacting only fed the assumptions people were eager to make about him. The charges were read aloud: trespassing on private property, refusal to vacate, disorderly conduct. The words echoed through the room, heavier than they should have been. According to the police report, Elias had been found sleeping behind a closed electronics store, leaning against the brick wall near a loading dock. When asked to leave, he had refused. Politely, the report noted, though that detail was quickly glossed over. The situation escalated. Handcuffs followed. As the prosecutor stood to summarize the case, his tone carried a faint edge of sarcasm. He painted Elias as a man who repeatedly ignored lawful instructions and showed a pattern of defiance. He emphasized Elias's lack of permanent address, pausing just long enough for the implication to settle in the room. A transient individual, he said, adjusting his tie, no fixed employment, no clear ties to the community. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the gallery. Someone coughed to cover it up, but the damage was done. Elias felt it, the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, something colder. A memory of being seen as less than human, as disposable. He had felt it before, in places far louder and far more dangerous than this courtroom. The public defender assigned to him stood next. She was young, overworked, and clearly unprepared. Her voice wavered as she spoke about mitigating circumstances, about homelessness being a complex issue, about her client meaning no harm. She avoided looking directly at Elias, as if afraid his presence might undermine her already fragile argument. The judge had not yet spoken. Judge Harold Whitman was an older man with silver hair and a reputation for efficiency. He disliked delays, disliked emotional appeals, and disliked defendants who came before him unprepared. As he reviewed the file on his bench, his expression was neutral, bordering on bored. Elias stood when instructed. He straightened his back, despite the ache that ran through his spine. His voice, when he spoke his name for the record, was low and steady. Elias Turner. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Turner," he said, with a tone that suggested doubt. "Do you have anything to say for yourself before sentencing?" Elias hesitated for a moment, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew how little it would matter. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "I wasn't causing trouble, I just needed a place to rest. I followed every instruction until they told me I had to disappear." The word hung in the air. Disappear. Another soft chuckle came from the gallery. The prosecutor shook his head slightly, as if amused by the response. "Your Honor," he said, "the defendant seems to believe necessity excuses disobedience." Judge Whitman looked up at last. His eyes settled on Elias, assessing him the way one might assess an object, quickly, clinically. "Mr. Turner," the judge said, "this court deals in facts, not feelings. The fact is, you were trespassing." "Yes, Your Honor," Elias replied. "That's true. And you refused to leave when instructed." "I asked where I was supposed to go." A pause followed. The judge's pen stopped moving. "Answer the question," Judge Whitman said curtly. "Yes, Your Honor," Elias repeated. I refused. There it was, the admission everyone expected, the box neatly checked. Judge Whitman leaned back slightly. This court sees cases like yours every day, he said. Men who think the rules don't apply to them. Men who take up space where they're not welcome. Elias felt something shift, not anger, but resolve. He had taken worse orders under far harsher conditions. He had stood his ground when the cost was measured in lives, not citations. But here, in this room, he was just a homeless black man in a threadbare jacket. The judge glanced down at the file again, preparing to move on, to pass judgment quickly and cleanly. That was when his eyes caught on a line of text buried deeper in the paperwork, something the clerk had almost overlooked. He frowned slightly. The room remained unaware that everything was about to change. The courtroom settled into a brittle quiet after the laughter faded, the kind of silence that wasn't respectful but uneasy, as if everyone sensed something unpleasant lingering in the air. The bailiff called the next procedural step, papers shuffled, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The black homeless man remained standing where he had been told to stand, hands clasped loosely in front of him, shoulders straight despite the frayed coat hanging off his thin frame. His name, when it was read aloud, sounded ordinary. Too ordinary for the way people looked at him. The prosecutor repeated it with mild impatience, already framing him as a problem to be processed rather than a person to be heard. Vagrancy, trespassing, failure to comply. Small words stacked together to make a heavy judgment. The man listened without interrupting. His eyes moved slowly across the room, not in defiance, but in quiet observation. He noticed everything. The cracked seal on the American flag in the corner, the judge's gavel worn smooth from decades of use, the faint tremor in the young public defender's hands as she flipped through her thin file. He had learned long ago that silence was often mistaken for weakness, but he also knew when to wait. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Sir," he said, voice edged with condescension, "you've been brought here multiple times this year. You refuse shelters, refuse assistance, and continue to break minor laws. Do you have anything meaningful to say for yourself today?" A few heads turned. Someone in the gallery sighed loudly. The question wasn't really a question, it was a formality, a door already half closed. The man took a breath before answering. When he spoke, his voice was calm, low, and steady, surprisingly steady for someone who slept on concrete. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "I do." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Go on." "I don't refuse help," the man said. "I refuse places that won't let me keep my documents. I refuse places where people go missing. I refuse to be treated like I'm less than human." A murmur rippled through the room. The prosecutor scoffed softly, but the judge lifted a hand to silence him. "You expect this court to believe you're choosing to live on the streets?" the judge asked. The man nodded once. "I expect the court to believe I'm choosing dignity." That word hung in the air longer than expected. The public defender finally found her voice. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "my client has no prior violent offences. He's been cooperative in every encounter. He also claims to be a veteran, though the system hasn't." The judge cut her off with a sharp glance. "Many people claim many things." The man shifted then, just slightly. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, but resolve. "With respect, Your Honor," he said, "I don't claim it. I earned it." That earned him another wave of restrained laughter. Someone whispered, "Sure you did," under their breath. The judge sighed, already reaching for his pen. "Enough. This court is not a stage for speeches. Without documentation, your words don't carry weight." At that, the man looked directly at the bench. His posture didn't change, but the room seemed to. "My documentation was taken when my tent was cleared by city workers 3 months ago," he said, "along with my medals, along with my discharge papers. I reported it. Nothing happened." The judge paused. His pen hovered above the page. Medals? He repeated, slower now. Yes, sir. For what service? The man answered without hesitation. United States Army, Infantry, 2 tours. The courtroom went still, not silent, still. Even the prosecutor stopped tapping his pen. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying the man as if seeing him for the first time. The worn boots, the scar just visible above the collar of his shirt, the way he stood, balanced, disciplined, unmistakably trained. "What's your full name?" the judge asked. The man gave it. The judge typed it into his computer, more out of reflex than belief. He expected nothing to come up. Another dead end. Another confirmation of what he already assumed. Instead, the screen loaded, and kept loading. The judge's expression changed, slowly, subtly. His brow furrowed, then smoothed. He leaned closer to the monitor, eyes scanning line after line. The laughter never returned. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft clicking of keys as the judge opened a file he hadn't expected to find, one that had been sitting there the entire time, waiting to be read. The courtroom felt different after the judge finished reading the military file. It was no longer just a room where cases were processed one after another. The air had weight now, heavy with something unspoken. Every person present understood that what had begun as a routine hearing had crossed into unfamiliar territory. The judge lowered the folder slowly, as if the papers themselves demanded respect. His hands, steady moments earlier, now rested flat on the desk. He did not speak right away. He looked at the man standing before him, the same man who had been mocked, dismissed, and laughed at only minutes ago. The homeless man stood exactly where he had been all along. His shoulders were straight. His chin was raised just slightly, not in defiance, but in dignity. He had learned long ago how to stand still while the world talked over him. "Mr. Harris," the judge finally said, using the name written at the top of the file. His voice was different now, lower, slower. "You served 3 tours." "Yes, sir," the man replied quietly. "In Afghanistan and Iraq," the judge continued, reading again to be sure. "Combat engineer, you were responsible for clearing roads of explosives." "Yes, sir." The judge exhaled through his nose. Several people in the courtroom shifted in their seats. The prosecutor avoided eye contact. The defense attorney stared at the floor. The bailiff, who had earlier smirked, now stood rigid, eyes forward. The judge turned a page. "You received a Bronze Star for Valor," he said, "and 2 Purple Hearts." A murmur spread through the gallery, quickly silenced by the judge's raised hand. "Tell me," the judge said, looking directly at Mr. Harris now, "how does a man with this record end up sleeping under a bridge?" The question was not accusatory. It was not skeptical. It was honest. Mr. Harris swallowed. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, not anger, but memory. "When I came back," he began, "I tried to go back to normal life. Got a job, construction, thought I was doing okay." He paused. "But the nights were hard. Loud sounds, nightmares. I couldn't sleep. I started missing work." The courtroom was silent. No one interrupted him. "I went to the VA," he continued. "Wait lists were long. Appointments months away. I was told to be patient." He gave a small, humorless smile. "I'd already learned patience in the desert." The judge closed the file slowly. "Did you receive treatment?" he asked. "Not before I lost the job," Mr. Harris said. "Not before I lost the apartment. After that, things move fast." The judge nodded once, as if something painful but familiar had just been confirmed. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, attempting to regain control of the situation. Regardless of the defendant's past, he was still trespassing. The judge raised his hand again, more sharply this time. "I am aware of the charge," he said. "I am also aware of context." He looked back at Mr. Harris. "Did anyone mock you today?" the judge asked. The question landed like a dropped glass. Mr. Harris hesitated. He glanced briefly toward the gallery, then back at the bench. "Yes, sir," he said calmly, "but I'm used to it." That sentence hit harder than any accusation. The judge leaned back in his chair. His jaw tightened. He looked out at the courtroom, the lawyers, the staff, the spectators, and for a moment it felt as though he was not just addressing a single case, but an entire system. "This court," he said slowly, "exists to serve justice, not convenience, not stereotypes. Justice." He turned to the bailiff. "Remove the laughter from this room, immediately." The bailiff nodded, visibly shaken. The judge then faced Mr. Harris again. "Sir," he said, his voice firm but respectful, "you stood for this country. Today, this court will stand for you." A wave of emotion rippled through the room, quiet but undeniable. For the first time since he had entered, Mr. Harris allowed himself to blink back tears. The judge was not finished, not even close. The courtroom felt different after the judge finished reading the file. It was no longer a place of routine judgments and quiet prejudice. It had become a chamber of reckoning. The air was heavy, charged with something close to shame. The judge slowly removed his glasses and placed them on the bench. His voice, when he spoke again, had lost all sharpness. "Mr. Harris," he said, addressing the homeless man for the first time by name, "I owe you an apology." A murmur rippled through the room. Apologies were rare here, especially to men like him. The prosecutor stared at the documents in front of her, her face flushed. She had skimmed the file earlier, assuming it would contain nothing but a discharge date and a faded commendation. Instead, it told a story of sacrifice she had never bothered to imagine. The defense attorney stood slowly. "Your Honor," he said, "with the court's permission, I would like to add context." The judge nodded. The attorney turned toward the courtroom. Mr. Harris served 3 tours overseas. After his last deployment, he returned home to find his mother deceased and his house foreclosed due to predatory lending while he was active duty. He sought help. He was denied. He struggled with untreated PTSD. He lost work. He lost housing. The attorney paused, letting the words settle. "And despite all of that," he continued, "he has no criminal record. Not one. Today he was mocked for being homeless. But he is not here because he committed a crime. He is here because he exists in a system that failed him." Silence followed, deep, uncomfortable silence. The judge leaned forward. "Is that accurate, Counselor?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge exhaled slowly. "Then this court has made a grave error in how this case began." He turned toward the bailiff. "Remove the cuffs." The metallic click echoed loudly as the restraints were unlocked. Mr. Harris rubbed his wrists, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden, unfamiliar sensation of dignity being returned. The judge addressed the courtroom. "This case is dismissed. Immediately." Gasps filled the room. "But that is not all," the judge continued. "This court will formally refer Mr. Harris to the Veterans Support Council and order an immediate review of why he was denied services. Furthermore," he paused, his eyes scanning the spectators, the officers, the attorneys, "this court will review its own conduct." He looked directly at the arresting officer. "You will submit a written explanation as to why a decorated veteran was treated as a nuisance instead of a citizen." The officer swallowed hard and nodded. Then the judge stood. Everyone rose with him. But before leaving the bench, the judge turned once more to Mr. Harris. "Thank you for your service," he said quietly. Mr. Harris didn't speak right away. He simply nodded. Then, in a voice rough with emotion, he said, "I just wanted to be seen." The judge met his gaze. "You are." As Mr. Harris walked out of the courtroom, no cuffs, no escort, people watched him differently. Not as a joke, not as a problem, as a man who had carried a country on his back and survived long enough to finally be heard.